Solid tales, history uncovered. Have you ever wondered what the world would look like today if Germany had won the Second World War? Not just a dark age, but a fake utopia that eats your freedom alive. For many, the immediate reaction is obvious: a world plunged into the Dark Ages, where everyone speaks German and concentration camps line the streets. But the chilling truth is this: if Germany had actually won, the world would not have collapsed overnight. In fact, for a very long time, it would have appeared remarkably stable, even unnervingly prosperous. But pay close attention to the word appeared. The true catastrophe would not have been felt the moment the guns fell silent. Instead, it would have unfolded over the subsequent decades, a creeping, insidious despair born out of a perfect, classified order where even your every breath was calculated. Let us pierce the fog of history and step into this parallel world that we so narrowly avoided. First, we must establish the premise. The course of World War II was highly volatile, and a total German victory would have required more than just military prowess. It would have required history to take a continuous, fatal detour at several crucial junctures. Let us rewind the clock to the critical window between 1940 and 1942, and assume three monumental variables went in Berlin's favor. First, imagine that the German armor did not halt its advance at Dunkirk. Hundreds of thousands of frontline British and French troops are entirely annihilated. Subsequently, during the Battle of Britain, the Luftwaffe alters its strategy. Instead of bombing London, they relentlessly pound British radar stations and airfields, securing absolute air superiority. In this timeline, Britain is forced to sign a humiliating armistice and officially withdraws from the European chessboard. Winston Churchill is ousted, a pro-German puppet government takes power, and the Royal Navy is forced into strict neutrality. Second, imagine that the brutal winter of 1941 arrives a month late, or that the German summer offensive not only captures Kiev, but seamlessly takes Moscow. The Battle of Stalingrad never happens. The Soviet command structure, trapped and paralyzed in a fallen Moscow, completely collapses. The Soviet regime is forced to dissolve, its remnants retreating east of the Ural Mountains to form a fractured, desperate rump state. The most vital resource hubs of Europe, the breadbasket of Ukraine and the oil fields of the Caucasus, fall firmly into German hands. Third, imagine that isolationist sentiment in the United States gains absolute dominance, or that the attack on Pearl Harbor simply never occurs. America is kept out of the war indefinitely, existing merely as a distant trading partner. Add a stroke of luck, and by 1943, Germany would be the unchallenged ruler of Europe. So, what would the first day after the war look like? If you picture a landscape of smoldering ruins, anarchy and chaos, you fundamentally misunderstand the German machine. You must acknowledge an objective, albeit cruel reality. On the surface, Nazi Germany appeared to be led by a cabal of hysterical fanatics. But deep in its bones, the engine powering this nation was a cold, ruthlessly precise industrial machine. What did this system excel at? Not screaming speeches in public squares, nor endless chaotic slaughter. They excelled at making spreadsheets, building bureaucratic systems, compiling census statistics, and micromanaging populations. This was an administrative instinct woven into their cultural DNA. The moment the war ended, this machine would have instantly switched from destruction mode to construction mode. In the first 10 years post-war, you would witness an administrative efficiency that would leave the free world stunned. Railways would be rapidly repaired and standardized into a massive broad-gauge network. Double-decker luxury trains would glide at 200 kilometers per hour, seamlessly connecting Berlin, Paris, Vienna, and Moscow. Factories would fall under strict, centralized management. Resources and labor, whether domestic workers or foreign laborers, would be centrally allocated by state planners, reassigned and slotted into place like cogs in a machine. Economically, early post-war Europe might run smoother than at any time in its history. Inflation would be forcibly crushed by executive decree. Unemployment would sit at absolute zero. The most visceral manifestation of this order would be the reconstruction of Berlin. Hitler's ultimate dream, the world capital of Germania, would leap from the blueprints into reality. Imagine walking the streets of Berlin in 1950. Beneath your feet is a colossal north-south axis, 120 meters wide, double the width of the Champs-Élysées in Paris. At the end of this grand boulevard looms the Volkshalle, the People's Hall, towering 290 meters into the sky, with monumental searchlights glinting off its unimaginably massive dome. A structure so vast it generates its own independent indoor microclimate. The streets are immaculately clean. There are no strikes, there are no protests, no political gridlock. To an uninformed tourist or an observer arriving from a fractured region, this would look like an absolute utopia. This is the first great twist. A victorious Germany would not immediately drag the world into chaos. It would pull the world into a chillingly calm, rational, yet deeply unsettling order. This raises the ultimate question. Under this new world order, could an ordinary person live a good life? The answer is brutal. It depends entirely on your bloodline. In this reality, men are no longer created equal. Humanity is biologically bifurcated. If you are incredibly lucky, if you belong to the core Germanic demographic, are recognized as a Nordic cousin, or possess highly technical skills as an engineer, scientist, or senior bureaucrat, congratulations. You hold the golden ticket to this new world. The state would deliver on its pre-war promises. You would have a highly stable job, backed by heavy state welfare subsidies. You might own a Volkswagen Beetle and take state-sponsored cut-rate vacations through the Kraft durch Freude, strength through joy, program to the sunny beaches of the Crimean Peninsula. Your children would receive an elite, rigorous education, learning infrastructure engineering, glider piloting, and state-sanctioned racial theory from a young age, groomed to be the strong heirs of the Reich. Within this tier, life is beautiful, prosperous, and steeped in national pride. But everything has a price. Just as physics dictates the conservation of energy, so too does sociology. The energy required to maintain this utopia is generated by burning another segment of humanity. If you had the misfortune of being born Slavic, Jewish, Romani, or categorized as any inferior demographic, your life would have only three possible conclusions: expulsion, enslavement, or systematic erasure. And note this crucial detail: this would not be the emotional, chaotic mob violence of a street riot. This would be extermination written into law, woven into the very fabric of the bureaucratic system. It is not madness, it is a cold, rationalized, administrative decision that you should not exist. That is where the true horror lies. Some might wonder, if Germany won, would human technological progress have stagnated? The reality might be the exact opposite. In the short term, technological advancement would likely have accelerated. Do not forget that during World War II, Germany was at the absolute bleeding edge of rocketry, jet propulsion, chemical engineering, pharmaceuticals, and automated manufacturing. Without a German defeat, Wernher von Braun and his V-2 rocket team would not have been swept up by the Americans. They would have remained at the Peenemünde Army Research Center. In this timeline, you might have seen humanity's first artificial satellite launched by 1950 and witnessed a manned spacecraft land on the moon before 1960. Only the flag planted in the lunar dust would not bear stars and stripes, but a swastika. Jet airliners would have connected the globe much earlier. Massive mainframe computer networks, relying on early punch card technology, would be deployed sooner to manage colossal demographic databases. The German chemical industry would trigger explosive advancements in synthetic materials and medical technology. But there is a chilling caveat to this progress. Who does this technology serve? In that world, science is no longer a noble pursuit of truth. It is a weaponized tool of the state's will. Unshackled from all ethical and moral constraints, human experimentation would become routine. The atrocities of Joseph Mengele would be integrated into orthodox medical doctrine. Genetic screening and eugenics would form the core of public health policy. The physically disabled, the mentally ill, and even those deemed to possess weak personality traits would be flagged as genetic defects and quietly culled from the population. Computer technology would not be used to invent an open internet for human connection. It would be utilized to build the world's first mass big data surveillance state. Every citizen's bloodline, political leanings, and daily speech would be logged onto punch cards and stored in monolithic archives in Berlin. Scientists would no longer be revered thinkers. They would be vassals to power. You are allowed to research, but not to question. You are allowed to innovate, but never to oppose. When science stops asking, "Is this right?" and only asks, "Is this useful?" it mutates into a terrifying monster. The more advanced this technology becomes, the more insignificant the dignity of the individual human being. If physical extermination and enslavement were not terrifying enough, the ultimate, most despairing outcome of this timeline is the total spiritual homogenization of mankind. If Germany had won the war, the world would have entered an era entirely devoid of opposition. There is no Cold War, there is no Soviet Union, there are no liberal democracies to provide checks and balances. The planet would be subjected to a single monolithic answer, the will of the state. In this world, art, literature, and philosophy would be utterly reduced to state propaganda. Anything deemed critical, reflective, or labeled as degenerate art, the paintings of Picasso, the rhythms of jazz, the novels of Franz Kafka, would be completely eradicated. In their place would stand an endless, monotonous sea of grand narratives, imposing sculptures glorifying brute strength, films romanticizing blood and soil, and poetry solely dedicated to praising the Führer. Human creativity is born from freedom, diversity, and the collision of differing ideas. When all dissenting voices are silenced, culture becomes a stagnant pool of dead water. Germany might build the fastest rockets known to man, but they would never invent rock and roll. They would never film Schindler's List. They would never author existentialist philosophy. When a single regime simultaneously wields the most advanced technology, controls the vast majority of the Earth's resources, enforces the most airtight population surveillance, and eliminates all opposition, it will inevitably do one thing. It will turn the entire world into a colossal laboratory. Within this laboratory, humanity is stratified. Genes are screened. Education is strictly homogenized. Thoughts are optimized. You are not permitted to object. You will simply be corrected. And the most terrifying part of all, the vast majority of people would not even realize there was a problem, because daily life is stable. The social order is crystal clear. War is a distant memory. You would be living in a global Truman Show. The news you consume every day is meticulously edited. The history you are taught has been surgically altered. You would look around and believe this is simply how the world is. But the most sacred element of the human soul, free will, would be gone. You would no longer be an independent individual. You would be nothing more than a biological cell in the living organism of the empire. And a cell does not need to think. It only needs to obey the commands of the brain until the day it dies. Why do we discuss this today? Why map out a history that never came to pass? It is not for shock value, and it is certainly not to whitewash the horrors of the Third Reich. We do this to understand one profound truth. The ultimate trajectory of our world is not determined merely by who wins a war on the battlefield. It is determined by whether the victor can be questioned, checked, and corrected. The greatest triumph of World War II was not simply that Germany lost. It was that we managed to barricade an extremist, totalitarian virus outside the gates, preserving the mainstream order of human civilization. History Uncovered. Subscribe to Solid Tales.